Welcome to Roots Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Roots and Ruminants podcast. I'm Justin Frichty, and we got, once again, co-host Jared Knock, and we're on to episode 8, okay? And I swear every time we line one of these up, they get better and better, and the response from our listeners continues to get better, faster, quicker, more downloads. So thanks once again for listening to this. This is going to be a treat, okay? This is probably going to encompass a lot of the things that we've talked about with previous guests as far as raising livestock on the land, putting some practical uses in place with those livestock to better the soil. And today we've got Brian and Jamie Johnson from Frankfort, South Dakota. And if you want to talk about a family operation that's done those things well and done them with soil health at the forefront of their focus of raising cattle, crops, and a family, this is probably it. So Jared and I have, we've had this one in the back of our minds to get on the schedule for a long time, and are excited to have you guys here. Okay, so like anything, or like all of our other episodes, we don't want to spend a lot of time talking. We want to hear your story. So we want to,
Today we're live here from Carpenter, South Dakota.
That's new.
From Dakota Vision Ag Global Headquarters today, kind of halfway point. Want to have a chance for Brian and Jamie to do a little bit of introduction, talk us a high-level view of their operation, and talk a little bit about, kind of how they've got started in a soil health journey that's led us to this point, and then we'll talk about a lot of those details. So, Brian, Jamie, have at it.
Go ahead. You're the talker.
So Brian and I farm at Frankfort, South Dakota, and we have overview of our family. We have 4 children, 15-year-old to a 5-year-old. And we farm with Brian's parents, Alan and Mickey, and they're kind of semi-retirement, pretty much.
As retired as a farmer ever gets.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
So, we are, like Jared said, very soil health focused on our farm, and it's really kind of the mantra that we have is everything needs to come full circle and improve the land. Whatever we're raising or grazing needs to be coming back full circle.
So we'll start out. My great-grandfather came over from Sweden back in 1906. And he fortunately picked a very good spot of the world to set roots down.
Do you ever wonder how they did that back then? Look, there's a little stream. That's where we're going to settle.
That probably did it.
Yeah.
Because there was no soil maps.
Yep. And he picked a very good spot on the soil map.
Thank you.
So we're very grateful there, especially this year. But we raise, corn, beans, wheat, oats, and barley for forage, alfalfa. We got 100 cows and calves, and got a lot of pasture we run cattle on, and it's grass for a reason. That's the big thing we always go back to is how many years ago people were tearing up grass for corn, and that's not how we operate. So
We have some of those conversations with people already now, and sometimes it's 10, 20, 30 years about, maybe we went a little too far. How do we get this back? What do we do with these acres and that kind of thing? It happens, right?
When people were doing that, we were planning CRP. We were.
Yeah.
That's probably how long a lot of those areas have been planted back.
11 years ago is when we first started planting CRP.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And that was right before the corn got crazy.
Yep. So there's when I go to your guys' place and I travel around looking at it, you've got really your sensitive areas, waterways, which are, were CRP. Now they're a forage source for you as well as a habitat opportunity. You've got pasture. Some of pasture you've created, you've actually expanded a little bit or repartitioned off to make sure that they're viable economic units to run livestock on. And then you've got some really, really high production fields, right? And so one of the things I think is great about your guys' stories you talked about is that we're talking about soil health, and we're also talking about it with Brian, who's really elevating, and Brian and Jamie are both elevating their expectations for yield at the very, very top, right? Entering into yield contests and placing in South Dakota, yield contests for soybeans and things like that, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's been a few years, but we've got some, we go back to the, great soil that we have on our operation. we're very blessed in that fashion. So the productive ground, we definitely can push along if we need to, but it's managing the marginal acres as well. And so that's where the grass and the CRP and the pasture ground is really, excuse me, been a asset to us because we know where we can grow crops and where we shouldn't.
Right. I think some of that comes back to just best land use for the land that you have, really focusing on, you keep planting that low spot and that alkali, and every year nothing grows, and every year you rip it up, and every year you plant it back, and it's not the best use of that land, right? And you're losing money on it or whatever it may be. But we really try and focus on, acre by acre management and what's the best use of every single acre on our farm.
When did you start making that shift? Was it you, Brian, that was making that shift and saying, you know what, if we got this corner, it's a pothole, it's got saline issues, let's fix that thing, let's put it into permanent. Was it you or was it your dad, or what, how did that transition happen?
It was a combination of things. My dad, he switched us over to no-till back in '86.
Okay.
After talking to Dwayne Beck, who
Yeah.
was still
Yeah.
at the Redfield Research Farm. So,
yeah.
the godfather of
No-till in South Dakota.
Yeah.
He's
yeah.
it.
That was the big step there. I came back in '04 from Brookings and had a few good years there, and then it got wet in 2009. And we realized that these areas, these waterways that we were really struggling with, and we couldn't get them planted. You'd fight with them all year long. And so we knew we had to do something different. And I think it was 2010 when we enrolled a bunch of them in a CRP. It was, take the crap out.
Yep.
Get it out of there.
Yep.
And all of a sudden our fields became much more productive, and they were so much easier in the spring to plant because you didn't have those wet spots anymore.
Sure.
When it was ready, it was ready.
Yep.
And you didn't even have to worry about it. It was zero stress. And so, our district conservation at the time was, Shane Jordan. He made great recommendations for us over the years. Great asset. I think he's one of the best around. He's not in that role anymore. He's a resource conservationist, something to that effect.
Sure what his
Yeah.
title
He got
is.
promoted, because he was doing a good job. That happens. So you get a good one, they leave. But and I'm sure there was a bird on my shoulder, mainly the wife, telling me that she was sick of looking at those wet spots. And so it was the right move at the time. And then I think back here a couple weeks ago, we were coming home, and she made the comment as we were just driving that last half mile. She goes, the best part about coming home is I see these grass waterways every time.
Yeah.
It's very it's very unique, I guess. You don't see that. In some areas you do, but where it's high farm acres, you don't see it. People plant right through them, struggle with them.
Right.
And I guess that's just something that I always take pride in, because where I grew up in Nebraska, we had waterways because we had a lot more diverse terrain where we had a lot more hills than what we have here.
Yeah.
And so we did have waterways in our fields. So that's always kind of like my thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Just to have, and it helps with the erosion and all the things, like all these huge rain events that we had this last couple days, keeps that soil in place, helps utilize that water better, and just looks a lot better too.
It's a great hunting habitat. We've got some friends that come and hunt, and that's where the birds are at. That's where the deer's at, and they know it.
Sure.
Right.
So how do in this day and age where equipment's not going to get smaller, fields aren't getting smaller, for the person that's like, yes, it's ridiculous, I'm going to farm fence line to fence line, and I don't want to stop for a waterway or have to spray around a grass patch. What's the argument back to them to justify doing that?
You're not making money on those acres. It really comes back to, and I'll preach this up and down, I just really think people don't know their break evens, and they don't know their numbers on their farm, and they don't realize if you really sat down and work that number out, what you're losing and those marginal acres, you'll go around it if you knew that you could make money.
We've had yield maps for a couple decades now.
Yep.
If you're not doing anything with them, they have zero value.
Right.
Yeah, they're pretty colors, but those reds on the map, those are the acres that you're supposed to figure out what to do something else
Different.
with.
Yeah. Information that you record and don't analyze or make decisions based off of is really a futile exercise. Yeah.
Exactly.
So in row clutches and automatic shutoffs and sprayer and stuff should make it conceptually easier, right, Brian?
In theory, yes. But then you've got more electronics that can go wrong.
True.
We don't have those on our planter because we've got mostly square fields. And we've only got a 40-foot planter, and I can shut off half of it at a time. So the break even there, cost per row, when we changed our planter here, how many years ago, we didn't do that.
Okay.
Just our operation. Other guys, obviously, it makes sense, but it's got to work for your operation. You got to figure out if that cost is going to actually yield you more.
Yeah. Well, I feel like back in the day when you were out there with a narrow front tractor, you wanted to make sure you didn't, bust up and have washouts in your field because you would literally tear the front end off of your narrow front tractor if you're out there, right?
Yep.
Then things got bigger, where it was way easier just to go straight all the way through. And now things are actually big and still getting bigger, but more precise, right? So the technology, I think, is actually out there to say, yeah, it's a lot easier to keep that grass waterway in if we have automatic shutoffs on our sprayers so that we can maybe just drive through, but it just shuts off in between. And I think people don't give enough credit to, like, you establish, especially like a cool season, introduced aggressive waterway species and how well they'll recover. If you do kind of get through it a little bit, with some Roundup, it'll actually recover and fill itself in fairly decent as long as you keep the bulk of it there.
Yep. And one of the things when we set up our grass acres in those fields was I knew how many feet I needed to be away so that my GPS lines for my planter, I wasn't having any overlap.
Oh.
It's all set up so that when I plant, it's
very nice
to the edge of the row.
Yep.
So I'm not having 10 or 12 rows overlapping or whatever it is. So that, in my mind, that justified it because I wasn't wasting anything and everything was still fairly uniform and square.
Yep.
But we took those salinity acres out and they're gone.
Yep.
So just to clarify, so you went through and said in either 8 or 16 row increments and said, okay, I need this many 16 row passes, and then here's where I get to a partial. That's where I'm scoring it out.
Yep. It was 40-foot swath when we set it up. For example, this one corner of the field, and it was 40-foot increments, and I went past the salinity problem because never stop short. You got to go past.
Right.
And that's where I knew then I was okay. So it was a couple hundred feet, give or take.
I think the other thing to point out for a lot of folks who are familiar with CRP and say, and I think we can all criticize CRP for not allowing the land to be used properly, right? Grazed, in appropriate manners often enough and that kind of thing. But the program we've all seen CRP be used before and say, Farmer X is retiring. They have 700 acres. The year they retire, 700 acres go into CRP, right? Where it's like, I didn't want to deal with deciding which of my 12 neighbors to rent this land out to, so I just chose none of them and then went to the government. All right. So those are, and I think those aren't even really great habitat, right? Because if you don't have any water development in the middle of a section of brome grass or any kind of grass, there's no wildlife there, right? If there's no water, there's no wildlife.
Yep.
You did very much smaller chunks of CRP in and amongst working lands. So you've probably got some fields where on a quarter there was 10 acres, 15 acres into CRP just in the strategic areas.
Yep.
Right?
Anywhere from 4 to, I want to say 24.
Yes. So a whole different application of the program than, here's 2 quarters, put them into CRP.
Yeah. Yeah, we
didn't point that out.
Didn't do the big chunks, but that's partly because we've got some good soils, and so we didn't need to.
Right.
And there's still some spots where we probably should do more, but that's where I'm using the forage barley and should plant some grass in there. But part of me thinks that, or I could just fence it, change the fence, and graze more cows because that'd make the wife happy. So, happy life.
Let's talk about cows. Let's talk about the cow herd and how that's evolved in the last 10 years or so, Brian. Jamie.
Well, my dad had, started with Herefords way back in the day, and then we had eventually changed it over to Black Angus. And so I started my herd back in 2004. So when we were in Pierre as interns, I got the phone call from Dad my last semester of college, and he said, hey, there's 20-some heifers coming through Sale Barn. You want to buy them? I said, sure. Take care. Came home. There they were.
All right.
Yep. And then when we got married, we bought 15 pairs that we brought from Nebraska from my operation.
Okay.
So
that was the start of our herd. Now we're up to 100 And we've slowly improved the quality here, especially once you got us at our
Yeah.
hired an AI
Mr.
tech.
Diardnock, thank you.
I go up and do a little artificial insemination.
It helps to know people.
Yeah. We can talk about semen because this is Roots and Ruminants. So if we need to talk about, no, we don't want to talk about semen. We'll get flagged for something probably. Talk about semen too much in that episode.
Or we'll get more downloads.
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know if it'll be the target audience, but
Yep.
anyway. Yeah.
So we've definitely improved the quality of the herd. Our heifer quality is really improving over the last few years. And just drove through the pasture this morning. It's like, yep, and just start jotting some numbers down.
Nice.
Getting that time of year. But
Yeah, it's fun. Changing.
yeah. Yep.
Growing a little hair.
Yeah.
Cooler nights. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
good.
Finally cooled off too.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Buffing up a bit. So, so as far as the cattle operation goes, do you manage that with the same focus that you have on your farm ground, as far as we want to make sure that this is a healthy ecosystem? You mentioned your pastures are your poorer soils. They're probably rolling, probably have some creeks running through them.
Rocks.
Yeah, rocks, all that stuff. Okay.
Yep.
Your philosophical look at your fields and your philosophical look at your cattle herd, what are those? How are those similar? How are they different?
I feel like it's getting there,
Okay.
right? Like, so Brian started as a farmer. I brought a little cattle knowledge, not very much. But we're getting there. We're trying to
Getting where?
getting to the point of thinking of the cattle side of the operation as equal to importance of the crop or the
Sure.
cash crop side of the operation. Trying to meld the two together. It is. I'd say, Brian, we're getting there. We're getting to where you're thinking more of how the cattle can improve the working lands on the crop side and rotational grazing through the pastures, how we've set up our waters. We've done a lot of improvements in the last, I'd say, 5 years to fencing and water management and things like that for the cattle herd. And it is a hard shift of thinking when you're not raised like in a heavily dominant, like cattle industry focused operation where it was just like a side gig, right? You just had cattle just because you had these acres that you couldn't farm.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's usually in this neck of the woods. That's kind of how cow-calf operations work.
Yeah. Especially in our part of the world in Spain County where it's crop ground.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's guys getting out of cattle to plant crops.
Yeah. There's hardly any people left raising.
It's getting
I
fewer
feel-
and fewer.
yeah.
But I mean, the people that are doing it are the diehards, and they're changing how they're managing it to make it successful.
Okay.
But I feel like it's taken us a few years. Like I feel like we've always been on the top of our game on the crop end because that's Brian's dad's specialty that's what he did. He raised great crops and that's what Brian does. And we're trying to get that game on the cattle side too. Like still don't think we're probably considered ranchers. We're still farmers, but
But there's
we're
always room for
using-
improvement.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the cattle are definitely a tool in on both sides of the operation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The crop and the pasture side.
It's finding that balance to say, okay, we're going to have some cows. How many should we have? And how many do we have to maximize not only the pasture acres that we have, or what's the plus side or downside to adding onto this pasture a little bit, right? Or if this 80, only 35 acres can be farmed, and is it worth farming 35 acres and leaving the other 45 as nothing, or do you put the entire 80 into pasture, right? What's the best solution? So it's kind of ebbs and flows, and then how much winter grazing, how much cornstalk grazing and cover crop grazing is available to be able to maximize that as well. And so I know some people that maybe in this part of the world have too many cow-calf, pairs for that kind of balance to where maybe they're losing a little bit of revenue side from what they could be cash cropping
Right.
potentially. And then all the way the other way around, where all of a sudden people are so completely against having livestock around that you can drive by and see the missed opportunities, right?
Right.
Right.
Big chunk of unusable grass is now turned into nothing but brome grasses and no program. It just sits there and
Right.
right.
So one of the things we did, it's been a couple of years now, it was in 19, we installed an artesian well and buried a bunch of pipeline for water tanks. And they're set up on the corners of our main pastures as well as on the corners of some of our cropland. So I just opened open and shut some gates, and in they walk, away they go. So it's really easy to move them. It's all in the main headquarters. There's 300 and some acres of grass there. 3 different main summer paddocks, and then one is the calving pasture, and then 2 small fields. And those crop fields are the ones where we've raised some cool season forages, followed by cover crops that gave us the option of grazing when it got dry. We didn't have any there this year. Probably should have, but you can't outguess Mother Nature. Right. But we don't stock our pears too heavy either. We try and I have enough grass for the pears that I have, and if we get grazing in the fall, then that's just extra, and I can pull them off the grass sooner. But when we move them through each of those paddocks, it's kind of a 21-day run, and then I'll move them over. And so we're just in a couple weeks here, we'll go back to a pasture that we grazed in early June, and it's come back pretty good. Especially now, we had 2 inches of rain here last week of August, but that only gives us like 7.5 for the year. Yeah. We only had 5 the first half of the year. It's been hot and dry, just like everybody else. But it's the grass. It's amazing. It'll just fire right back as soon as you get a rain. And so we only took, we didn't overgraze it. Took about half and moved them off. And so there's a lot of forage there left for them. And by the time they're done there, we'll have some corn stalks and I'll have some cover crop acres for them as well.
Great. There's another kind of root that I want to talk about, because I was up at your guys' place this summer during a tour. Talk about tree planting 2021 at the Johnson Farms.
And that's funny.
Oh,
I just went out and did a check this morning. I don't get out there as much as Leo, our almost 10-year-old. He's been the main tree man this summer, watering constantly, never ending.
We should have kept track of how many gallons he actually went through this year.
Good thing it's well water and it's free.
Yeah.
New seeding trees take a little more than 7.5 inches of moisture in a year.
Yes, this was not the year to try that, especially 2,300 trees.
Yes. So in defense, I will say Jamie has been wanting this project done for 15 years, and you decided we're going to do it this year.
Yeah.
That's how it worked out.
So for the men listening, you should always listen to your wife much sooner.
This is your punishment for saying no 14 times in a row, Brian? Is that right?
Yes. One of the punishments.
Okay, so how's the count look?
It doesn't look great. But when I was looking this morning, because we finally got the deciduous trees staked and wrapped, because the deer were starting to hit on them pretty hard on the new trees right by the house. And so that got done actually when we were in Nashville a couple of weeks ago. The kids did it with Grandma and Grandpa, and the pine looked pretty bad. The
shrubs are phenomenal.
Yeah, the shrubs look really good.
Okay.
The cedar trees that all looked, I kept telling Leo, just keep watering them. Even if you think they're dead, don't skip over them. Just water it. And I saw a lot of new growth on cedar trees this morning when I was out checking them.
Yeah.
So,
and we're 5 days from our rain now. So I think everything just really, we got
and
natural water.
I mean, he's been watering once a week, like a gallon on every tree
every week,
once a week.
But you just can't keep up when it's this dry.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing that we did that probably is creating moisture issues is all we did in our pasture, around our calving pasture, was we just tilled strips. We did not put black plastic down. We did not till and tons and make lots of black dirt, because I didn't want the weeds. I didn't want that black plastic is just not very quote unquote green. It is, and it's not plastic. I guess it's fabric of whatever it is. It's just, it's
Seems
terrible.
like plastic to me when I've
Yes.
used it.
And it's like,
I don't think it's made of cotton.
no,
I think it's
it's
made of
very, it doesn't biodegrade. It has girdling issues when your trees get bigger, that you have to, it's a maintenance thing also. So we decided in the pasture that we are just going to till a foot strip, just enough for the tree planter to get in and bury trees. And then that's it. So there's still a lot of sod around those trees. And so I'm sure that has a lot to do with the moisture issues out there. But the trees that we planted on the other side of the road by the house, that was a renovation project through Equip. And so it had to be completely ripped up old trees. Like there was no way around. It was just going to be a weedy mess. And so we did put the fabric down on that. And those trees look pretty good.
I would say they're similar. I mean, they may be a little better there, but because I don't know if the sod took out a whole lot of moisture because there's not a lot of excess when you only get 5.
Yeah.
That's true.
When the grass is brown, I'm not sure how much moisture it can suck out.
Yeah. So, and the reason we did that is just because I didn't like tilling up. When we planted new trees,
When
16
we first
years
got
ago?
married.
Yeah.
Yep, at the other
Maybe
house.
7 years ago. Yeah. We planted new trees up there, and it was 8-foot wide strip, and I didn't really like tilling up sod.
Yeah.
And so we thought, we're going to do something different here. And so talked to one of our friends from Caputa, South Dakota, and he no-tilled them in. And like, I don't know if we'll do that, but I got a tiller
A garden tiller.
that we used to use for my mom's garden. And I took a bunch of the shanks off, so it was only like 6 inches wide. And then we just followed. My dad drove
You
the
got to
tractor.
tell this part because this is awesome.
Have you seen this? Have you seen the picture of this, Jared?
I have.
So he wouldn't let me mount the
GPS.
Starfire globe to his head on the Kubota tractor, but he followed me with our field tractor, and I set up lines out there. And then so he just followed right behind me on the hitch, so they're straight. So the conservation district could come in the spring and just straight shot. So it's it's like strip tilled trees is what it is.
Totally is.
Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, I took a picture of him and, posted it and kind of made fun of him. Wouldn't let me duct tape it to his head.
Driving a 200-horse tractor
Yes.
immediately
Yes.
followed by a 30-horse tractor.
Yes.
Yes. That is classic. Yes.
It was
Running
hilarious.
the tillage equipment. The 30
Yes.
horsepower
Yes.
tractor
Yes.
is running the tillage equipment.
Yeah, that's as extreme as we get with tillage in Spin County and our farm.
Cool. Trying this tillage thing out for the first time in 35 years. Not sure we're doing it right.
Conservation utility.
Yes.
Yeah, and the rationale was I'd rather have grass growing in between the rows
Yeah.
of the trees.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you got to get them going, and unfortunately, 2021 was not the year to pick. But
I don't know. I think it'll just be interesting just to see what comes back in the spring.
yeah,
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
It's like any kind of perennial planting. The first year is not the judge.
Right.
After that, then you can go look. But
it's
the first
just
year.
hard. And I think a lot of it, not necessarily like the moisture was a problem. I think the heat and the shock of how hot June was, that those little seedlings were just like, I just came out of a cooler. Are you kidding me? And now it's 100 degrees. No, thank you. I'm going to sit here and go dormant or die.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Came out of a literal reefer truck cooler into a convection oven.
Yeah.
40 mile an hour wind and 100 degrees dry.
Yep.
Because we watered not right away because we were busy planting and calving and all the other things of life. So we just didn't get it done.
yeah.
But
Because we're calving until first week of June 1, because we don't really start until mid-April.
Okay.
We used to start
early.
early April, and we kicked it back because Mother Nature kept kicking us in the shorts with blizzards, and it's like, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing this? I built this shed how many years ago for equipment, and 2 years in a row we had it full of cows. That's not fun.
There's still evidence of that. The men are all over the doors.
You got to do what you got to do. But they survived. There were some of them, those cows in there, they were in there for 10 days. And as they calve, we'd move them up to the barn and then kick them outside. But some of them did not calve during the storms and during the mud. And so there's 7 of them that they didn't have any idea how bad it actually was outside. We'd shut the 30-foot overhead door, had a bale feeder in there, had my big, huge water tanks on my semi-trailers, and just gravity fed a tank. And it was like a sauna in there. They were living the life.
It was hot.
One thing about the trees, and I think so we had a guy from Georgia, a listener from Georgia, call in the other day to Millborn Seeds, and I want to give a shout out to him. That's absolutely awesome. Yep. But we should point out to listeners from across the country that in South Dakota, where we live, we actually have to try to get trees to grow. They don't grow on their own.
Yes, it's very,
They're
very hard.
not going to be there unless you baby them for the first 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
3 to 5 years, and you kind of get through the grass sod, and they might kind of be on their own. But planting trees is a process.
Of all the things that we can grow in South Dakota, trees is by far the hardest thing.
Right.
It
for
is.
me.
Yep.
It's just ridiculous.
Well, that's the reason this is the tall grass prairie.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
Yes.
it's not a forest at all.
That's
it's
right.
grass.
Yeah.
Real grass, not trees.
And the other thing is that 2,300 trees, and you guys are doing, that's a lot of tree planting. But think about how many half-mile long shelter belts, right, there is around the countryside that are all dated. They're all like 30 to 70 years of age. and there's not a lot of those going back in.
No.
And a lot more trees coming out than going in our part of the world. In this, we're about 30 miles apart, but in this whole stretch, it'll be interesting to see how many trees there are in 30 years on that same drive, that same 30-mile drive. It might not be many at all.
I don't think so either. And I think, one, it's a nuisance. We were just talking about this. How did the subject get brought up? Yesterday, we had a breakfast at the community center uptown, and we were talking about trees that are declining, right? And you've got the emerald. I could talk about trees forever. It's kind of my niche. The emerald ash borer thing is really going to wreak havoc on a lot of shelter belts, a lot of towns, a lot of and I just really don't think it gets talked about enough. And they won't get put back in, right? Especially shelter belts. I think towns will replace here and there in their boulevards and, things like that, parks and whatnot. But ash trees, that was when we planted that first row of trees when we got married. That was the original deciduous tree in that planting. And we ended up replacing them all with maples. And now I wish I wouldn't have replaced them with maples. But they all just didn't make it, didn't do well. But it's...
I think it's hard for you because you come from Nebraska, the land of cedar trees.
Well, and other trees also. Home of other things, other trees, but yes, cedar trees. They're like a noxious weed where I'm from.
I feel like we're like South Dakota, like the bar and the Blues Brothers, like, oh yeah, we got both kinds of beer, Bud and Bud Light. Oh, we got both kinds of trees, Russian olives and cottonwoods.
Yeah. But so back to what we were talking about yesterday with a neighbor. We were talking about the declining tree strips, whatever. And have you ever read studies that when there is a crop field surrounded by trees, that it yields higher? Because the trees will protect, one, like wind damage and things like that. It holds the soil in place. And all the tree roots help keep the soil in place, but it also increases the fertility. Have you seen that, Jared, or no?
I'm a big fan, and it's hard to do here, and it'll take me 30 years to get it set up right in my own place. But of silvopasture and that symbiotic relationship between the deep water cycle and the shallow water cycle, right? And all those things that you're talking about, and how to do both of those. Because normally we talk about either forested or unforested, and not talking about a balance between the two. I believe that. What is more, if we go to a coffee shop, what's more often going to get talked about is tree effect, right?
Yeah.
On yield, right? They'll look at that narrow strip
right next to the
tree.
tree.
It's pretty good size, right next to the tree.
It can be. Yep.
And keep in mind, we plant a shelter belt. They're thick. We're planting trees that can get 30, 40 foot tall, and we're planting them 14 feet apart, 12 feet apart. I mean, almost overly thick, right? The idea to stop the wind from blowing, but we're almost planting them extremely thick in one little spot. So, I would fully expect there to be some advantages in the field, but what we see, right? The only thing we see is that tree effect on the outside of the field.
Yep.
Yep. You see the tree effect the first 40 feet on each side of the rows. It's the 100 feet away when all of a sudden the height of the corn goes up a foot or two, and your yield monitor jumps a little bit.
We have
that's the effect.
One field that we rent that has the situation with trees around it, and it is the highest producing. It also has good soil, so that helps too. But it is the highest producing field on our farm.
And I would say, in casual conversation, 90% of people would look at that 100-foot effect and just think that there's an exasperated decline on the first 40 foot. Not give credit to the bump 100 foot out. That would just make the contrast look even worse on the first 30, 40 foot.
And that's why you see a lot of these rows of trees over the last 10 years that have been taken out with tracos. Because the people only see the first 40 feet.
Right. And if they look at the next 40 feet after the first 40 feet, then it makes the 40 foot look even worse. And they go, well, look at it. It could be this much up here. It could be peak production. It's my best part of my field. And now these trees just ruined this 40 foot.
Yep.
Oh, food for thought.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so, and I've seen, and what we've done a little bit is done some, just grass hay plantings right alongside that, because that tree effect can also, at some level, have some benefit by offering shade to cool season grasses and legumes like alfalfa, other, introduced orchard grass, timothy, fescue, things like that want to have some kind of shade protection so that they stay viable and keep growing throughout the year.
Unfortunately, this field of ours it's as far away as anything on our farm. If it was near the farm, there'd be grass around
More
it.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And there'd be livestock out there every year.
Yep.
Sure.
But it's a logistics thing. It's a land ownership thing, and everybody's got that.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So we've talked about a lot of different practices that you've done, whether it was a fencing, watering project, now a tree project. Why are you doing these?
We like to work.
There's a joke in our family that we work during the week, but we work really hard on Sundays.
It's Sunday. It's time to go pull weeds in the trees and mow and water.
That was a real thing with the kid. We were
It's a
pulling
real
weeds with the
thing.
kids on Sunday this year.
It's a real thing.
They did not like that day. I don't know. It's all I've ever known. I was riding on the armchair with my dad's tractor for when I was little forever. Mm-hmm. He didn't push me into farming, but that's what I wanted to do. Went to college, ag business, because I knew I was coming back home. I didn't take the agronomy and animal science stuff, and I probably should have, but I was young and dumb. I figured it out.
You don't need to know all those things if you know other people.
Well, and that's part of it is you surround yourself with experts.
Oh,
Have a team.
Yep. Yeah.
What you don't know, talk to somebody that does. And so this is just something we really enjoy it. It's a great way to raise a family.
Yeah.
Here in South Dakota, we're very fortunate to have some good soil that we can raise a crop on and graze cattle and, just live the good life.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, part of it is just being a caretaker of what God's given us. I have a really, my faith plays a lot into everything that I do every day. And I feel like, and it's getting, the older that we get, for me personally, sometimes I feel like I'm already 80, but you act
No
like
comment.
it too. It's just doing, having the right reasons for doing things and doing it right and doing it well and teaching your kids values and hard work and all of the things that we have to take care of what we're given, and we have to not just take care of it and keep it the same. Like Jared, you and I have had this conversation about the word sustainable for how long have we known each other? Quite a few years. And it's more than being sustainable. Doing the same thing over and over is sustainable, right? It's like you said, when we spoke in Brookings, it's about creating the net positive. What are you bringing back? What are you creating that's a positive in your environment or on your operation? And that's important to me personally, to show our kids that we have to do better and be the example for others that you can do this, you can do the right thing, and you can, of course, the economics are really important, right? You still have to pay your bills. And you can do it and do it well and make money and have a nice lifestyle, But it's work. It's not putting the corn in the ground and coming back and harvesting it. It's work. But it's all just management and what everybody brings to the table, as far as knowing the right people and how we learn the things that we're doing is asking a lot of questions, failing a lot, learning a lot, and just bringing that back to our kids and saying, see, we totally messed this up, but what did we learn from it?
Sure.
So I don't know, just passing on those values. That's why I do it. My grandfather was on the conservation board back home in Nebraska, and I really had no concept of what he did until I got on our conservation board. I've been on our conservation board for a number of years, and I'm just like, oh, he had it. He knew what was going on. Like, he knew what was important, and passing that on and showing your kids why it's important to be involved with these type of things.
Yeah. That's what Jared and I were talking about this morning. We talking about values and how that drives us. We've had this reoccurring theme with our guests, I think, not completely intentionally, but that's probably that one thing that seems to be similar with everybody is you better have a big value-driven reason to be doing some of these conservation things. Now it's got to fit in economically, like you said, and from a production standpoint. But you're doing the right thing for your values, to feel good about them, to raise your family the way that you want to raise them. That's, darn it, that's huge.
Yep.
That's so important.
Well, I think you stick to your values, and the economics will come around because you'll figure out how to make it work. And I think part of the reason that I could say I'm content with how things look this year is because we know that the practices we've been using for the past 30 years, there's a reason that we're going to have a crop.
Sure.
Because you talk to the more experienced generation, and they say, yeah, this is pretty dry. We haven't seen this since like 76, and stuff burned up then.
Yep.
Right.
And in our part of the world, it actually looks okay this year.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't have 40 years ago.
Right.
It's because of those soil health practices.
In the 20 years between 76 and 96, there was probably 8 to 10 crop growing years that would have looked worse, as far as a reflection of green versus brown than what it looks like today. And you've done it with less moisture than you had in any of those 20 years, right?
This is as dry as we've been in decades.
Since 76,
yeah. And the heat. And that was, like we talked about earlier, it just went a heat shock in June through July, and it finally kind of let up here.
Yeah, I think, really after we have our basic needs met, right? After we have enough food and some clothing and a warm place to be at night, we're all just kind of wandering around trying to put things in their proper place, basically. And you look at, and I can see it, Jamie and Brian, when you drive up to your place, things look in order, right? And we talked about it before. There's going to be trees about where there should be trees, right? Is for protection, for aesthetics, and for openness at the same time. There's going to be grass and waterways where they're supposed to be, right? Where there needs to be drainage to move things out. There's going to be crop fields where the pitch of the land and the productivity is proper, and there's going to be pasture and fenced-in cattle where there's supposed to be cattle. And I think that's, you never quite always have it right, but I appreciate how much I've learned from you guys and watched you as you've tried to, over time, put things in their proper place. And then when the opportunities are given to you, or there's a neighbor or a landlord that says, hope that happens more and more often down the road, where someone says, I love how you put things in order.
Oh,
will you help me
so
do
nice.
this?
That's cool.
That's so nice, Jared.
I'm fortunate that my wife is very OCD oriented. And so
Jared
everything has a place. And she sees things that, we're trying to improve over the years. And she's more the big picture thinker, and I have to execute. And so she'll say,
do this.
Yeah.
I want this. He has to figure out how to.
And then in my mind, I'm going through the 18 steps to get to what she wants. And in her mind, it's 2 steps.
Yeah.
So it's how do you make that work? Yeah. Everything's got to line up somehow.
Yeah.
But
That's why it took 16 years to get trees planted.
There's a lot of steps in his mind to get there.
Yeah. Or I just didn't listen. It's, we're always trying to improve, and that's, we're never going to be content with what we're doing. There's always upgrades, I'm always tinkering with things out in the crop fields or changing something up with how we're doing the cattle. And unfortunately, social media, you see what other people are doing, and you kind of go, I wonder if I should try that. Right. But then you sit down and think how it would play out. Boy, that'd be more work. How much time do I have? Yeah. I see what, Jason Mock and the stock cropper in Iowa are doing, and it's just kind of like, boy, that looks like fun, but
it does.
Then you got to figure out, okay, where am I going to get these animals processed?
Right.
And, I just called into the locker here a few weeks ago for a date. They're booked out till April 14th. It's like, okay, yeah, the backup is a real thing.
Yeah.
Here in the rural part of the world. It's, it used to not be a big thing.
Yeah.
We're still dealing with it.
Well, we're going to have a chicken butchering bee, but I don't think that's happening, is it?
Who was supposed to be in charge of that?
Stuart is supposed to get the chickens.
I texted him like 4 times.
I don't
and
think it ever happened.
Nothing happened.
We were at a camping trip. There's 4 of us couples that get together kind of annually on a camping trip. Johnson's including that, and my wife and I, and 2 other couples. And we talked about we need to have and this is where I was going to go to next about raising kids anyway, so it kind of fits in. But we talked about there's certain basic things. I think it was Stuart was like,
yes.
I think my kids don't even know how to butcher chicken. You know what I mean? What would they do if they'd just be standing there looking at a chicken, they'd be starving and looking at a chicken, not know how to butcher it, right? Like, everybody should know how to butcher a chicken. It's like, well, who's going to teach them, Stuart? Like, our great-grandparents aren't around anymore to do that like they taught us. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it's our responsibility now. So that was going to be one of the things. We are going to do pig butchering. That's on.
We are?
We have the pigs, yeah.
I didn't sign up for that.
Oh, yeah, that was the next step. And then you were going to do canning next summer.
Oh, right? Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, yeah.
There's no blood involved with that. Totally sanitary.
So we'll do pig butchering sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Okay.
Super.
So we'll just skip the chickens and go right on to bigger animals. There's only, if you look at really commercialized, very simplistic, scaled farming, right? 20,000 acres, corn, soybean rotation, really simplistic, 100,000, 30,000 to 100,000 bushel grain bins only. There's just not that much of a place for kids to do stuff.
No.
When you get really, really, really efficient like they talk about.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small window where they can go pick rocks, right? That may be about it. But they'll probably have commercial rock pickers, which have too much to do. When you talk about just the diversification of crop farming, you talk about bale and straw and things like that I know that, get a little bit more involved in, but also the livestock and the trees. That's really offered a lot of opportunities for your kids to grow and be more involved hands-on, right?
And I still feel like there's not enough for them to do.
Yeah.
There's
You're
not.
probably right. But
there's not.
That's because you've been in the house. Our youngest is finally in kindergarten, so Jamie's like hit the freedom.
Yeah. But not really.
Planning some days.
But yeah, we got some chickens. I don't even remember when we got our first chickens. Just as pets, like we got like 4 chickens.
6-7 years ago. Leo was like 3.
Yeah, or 2. I can't remember.
Something like that.
Anyways, just as a fun, like, here, play with something.
He turned them into his pet.
Yeah.
Like, we got pictures of him riding his bike, and he's got him sitting on the handlebars.
Yeah. Yeah. The first Otto was the first one, and steer, like auto steer, like your tractor. Yeah.
Farm kid.
Yeah.
I love it.
Anyways, yeah. So in the trees, but they're kids. They gripe about all of it. I mean, they don't willingly go, yes, let's go scoop bunks out, or although Ella this year, the 15-year-old, she's always very conscious of like what other kids are doing on their farms, because we have a lot of feedlot families in our school district. And so there's a lot of, big operations that are constantly working cattle and moving cattle in and out and those type of things. And I'm like, well, ask your dad, run the grain cart during wheat harvest. And she did. And she's raked hay and baled hay for Brian before. And just a lot of it is just a time availability if they're around. They're, of course, sports kids, so they have things to do. But we're trying. We try to find as much as we can for them to do safely.
And it goes back to how you're talking about values. I mean, you look at some of these major grain farms now, and you look at today's workforce and the young kids that are coming back. They haven't had a lot of those hard work days, family values that we grew up in, or our parents working cattle, throwing square bales in 100-degree heat. They haven't had those opportunities, let's say, to kind of build character, we'll call it.
No opportunities to butcher hogs.
Right.
Jared's going to provide our children an opportunity.
Right.
Thanks, Uncle Jared.
Kids all grab on. I'll hold the knife with you. You go right in here in the neck.
But it's true. You really have to create the opportunity.
Yeah.
To teach your kids those things, even if it's not butchering animals. It's even freezing corn. They were complaining. I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember freezing corn with my grandma, and it was 100 degrees out. There was no air conditioning, right? You did it outside because that way the house didn't get so hot. You know,
Right.
I'm like, you have,
That's true.
and you have Ziploc bags. We used to have the bags that had the twist ties. Like, it wasn't even Ziploc bags 30 years ago.
Right.
Spoiled.
Those are things that were a part of necessity growing up that we now consciously need to, make it a priority to do them, to be honest, because canned corn at the grocery store is still 69 cents a can, which probably hasn't changed a lot in 25 years. And
But it still tastes like canned
well,
corn.
it still does,
from the store.
but you can survive on it.
Yes.
Right? And you can just hit the easy button and pick it off. And so you have to almost kind of keep reminding yourself to do those things. And I see some of the things that we were talking about, some of these practices, and some of it you might say, yeah, is it more time? Does it take more time? But it's family time, right? Or it's things that you can manifest values on your kids as far as the importance of this. And you can have them I remember the trees that I took care of when I was growing up, right? I still remember, I know which trees were the ones that I watered and weeded growing up, and I'll see them for the rest of my life, right? There's something to that.
Yep. You completely wrapped up how we started this with talking about values. Those are the reasons you do them, even though they may be unintentional. And heck, your corn example, it may not always make the most perfect sense from a financial perspective to do it.
Short term.
But exactly, short term. But long term, by golly, you're getting the gain that you want out of it.
Yeah, we have to make a point of not pushing the easy button.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I always enjoy our conversations. I want to thank you both so much for coming down and being a part of this. And we will.
I think we should have just done. You should have done one of those mic drops when you said we have to make a point not to push the easy button.
That was a good
We should have
call.
just ended it. Could have done that. Right?
Yeah,
Shut up.
we can.
We'll edit this back. Cut it all out. That'll be the last words on the podcast.
Thank you, Brian and Jamie, for joining us today.
Thank you.
We very much appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.